Ok, listo.
Hola, ¿qué tal? A todas las personas que nos están sintonizando en este momento, que están conectándose por Facebook Live. Estamos muy contentos de estar haciendo este primer Daca Day del año aquí en el Consulado de México en Salt Lake City. Contamos con varios invitados y varias dinámicas que vamos a realizar el día de hoy. En lo que la gente se está uniendo, quiero decir un poquito el contexto del Daca Day, ¿no? En años anteriores, antes de la pandemia, juntábamos un grupo de abogados aquí en el consulado y se acercaba la gente a que les ayudaran los abogados principalmente a renovar su solicitud de DACA, ¿no? Renovar este permiso de trabajo, esta acción diferida para todos los jóvenes que se les estaba por vencer o se les había vencido. Como saben, la nueva administración ha empezado a aceptar nuevas solicitudes de DACA y pues bueno, lo mismo, ¿no? Tenemos que hacer este esfuerzo para que todas las personas que son elegibles lo puedan hacer, puedan iniciar su trámite, pueden iniciar su proceso. Y es muy importante que el proceso se haga con la asesoría correspondiente, con una asesoría buena por parte de un abogado o un profesional del derecho que les pueda decir cómo llenarlo, qué hacer, qué poner en los diferentes campos, qué pruebas deben de someter para que pueda ser aceptada. Y obviamente hay muchos factores que pueden afectar el tener o no, el que sea o no sea aprobada su solicitud. Desde problemas con las autoridades, algún arresto que hayan tenido en el pasado, hasta pequeñas cositas de cómo fue su ingreso, cuándo ingresaron, todo eso tienen que ser muy conscientes las personas a la hora de llenarlo, de poner la verdad de las cosas y obviamente todo lo que se tenga que probar. Sabemos que en la comunidad pues hay mucha gente que está deseosa de ayudar, pero a lo mejor no tienen el conocimiento. Y hay otras que pues están esperando una oportunidad para cobrar un dinero que a lo mejor no se debe de cobrar y no saben cómo llenar una aplicación y las personas van a perder dinero porque finalmente si les rechazan la aplicación, pues el dinero no se regresa, el dinero con el que pagaron la aplicación de DACA no se regresa, entonces van a tener que volver a hacer el trámite y ya tienen una solicitud rechazada, etcétera, va a ser más complicado. Entonces en ese esfuerzo, detectando esa necesidad, pues obviamente nos unimos con nuestros abogados, PALE y abogados de la comunidad con los que hemos trabajado para poder realizar estas actividades y poder asesorar a las personas de cómo pueden llenar su solicitud, ¿no? Este evento, primero vamos a tener una sesión con la abogada Kendall Moriarty, donde nos va a explicar el tema de quiénes son elegibles y cómo llenar su solicitud. Posteriormente, tendremos una sesión de Zoom con participantes que se han inscrito a través de estas 2 semanas desde que se anunció el evento para resolver dudas específicas. También tendremos apoyos económicos si así lo requieren, obviamente las personas que el dinero sea un impedimento para poder realizar el trámite, los vamos a poder apoyar o vamos a poder analizar la posibilidad de apoyarlos. Entonces, los que nos han inscrito, los invitamos a que se inscriban porque terminando la charla, la presentación, pasaremos a un Zoom, ¿no? Ya entre nosotros y los participantes para resolver estas dudas uno a uno. Luego les explicaré la dinámica, pero inscríbanse si quieren, compártanlo con sus conocidos. Si saben de alguien que necesite apoyo, compartan este Facebook Live y aquí vamos a estar poniendo las ligas para que se puedan estar inscribiendo. Y pues, mientras tanto, vamos a empezar con la charla con Kendall. Ella es parte de Marital Law Firm, que es parte de la plantilla de abogados PALE que tenemos aquí en el consulado. Y ella nos es profesional de derecho, es abogada desde el 2016, ¿correcto? Y pues es una persona que está comprometida con la comunidad de hacer las cosas correctamente y en este momento nos va a dar la plática. Kendall, adelante, por favor.
Pues gracias por tenerme. Voy a cambiar a hablar en inglés. Si hay algo que quieren que repita en inglés, en español, está bien, solo me avisan por el comment o Eloy me va a avisar si hay comments. Pero la presentación está en inglés, entonces voy a hablar así por ahora. So, okay. So just to start out, DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was a presidential executive order first enacted by President Obama that protects recipients from removal, which is just a fancy word for deportation, so long as it remains current. It comes with employment authorization and a valid Social Security number. The specific qualifications are important. It's important that you qualify exactly, not close to or almost. So it's important that, first of all, that you entered before you turned 16. You had to have celebrated your 16th birthday inside the United States. That your entry before you were 16 happened before June 15th of 2007, and that you've lived here continuously since then. You also had to be under the age of 31 at the time that the executive order was signed. So that means that you have to be born on or after June 16th of 1981. So, and then you have to be physically present. You had to have been physically present on the date it was signed, which was June 15th, 2012, and physically present in the United States when you submit your deferred action application. Also, you can't have had status when it was signed, which means that if you entered with permission, maybe a visa, a student visa, or a tourist visa, it had to have expired before June 15, 2012. If you never had status, then you just then you automatically qualify. There is an educational component, so you have to have completed high school or have obtained a GED, have been honorably discharged from the armed forces, or currently enrolled in a school at the time of your application, which would result in either a high school diploma or a GED. And the final thing is the criminal record qualifications. You cannot have been convicted of a felony or a significant misdemeanor or 3 or more other misdemeanors, and you do not otherwise pose a threat to the national security or public safety of the United States. There are 3 primary forms that you will need to fill out. The other 2 forms are optional. The first is the actual deferred action application. It's the I-821D. The second is the work permission or the work permit application, the form I-765. And then a third one, sorry about the notification, but the third one is the work permit application kind of supplement that is just an explanation for why you need work authorization. The G1145 is optional. It's just if you want electronic updates sent to your phone about your application throughout the, like while it's pending. And then if the last one is if you don't want to send in your application with a check or money order for the filing fee, you can have USCIS bill your credit card or debit card, and you fill out that the G1450 to kind of authorize that. You will also want to include 2 color passport photos so that your work permit can be printed. So I'm going to go through the evidence, or just the kind of categories of evidence. There are examples of how to comply or how to prove that you qualify in each of these categories, but every person's situation is different. Every person's kind of story is different. A lot of what you have in terms of evidence might depend on your parents and what kind of records they kept when you were young, or what kinds of things you did, or whether you were enrolled in school right away, things like that. So keep in mind that these are just examples. You do not need to include these specific ones or all of them, but these are just things that have worked for other people and that might help you to start to think about ways to prove each qualification. So you always want to start out with identity documents. So a birth certificate with an English translation, anything you submit that's in another language has to be accompanied by an English translation. If you have a passport or country ID or some kind of form of photo ID, I recommend submitting it. That could even be a Utah privilege driving card or driving privilege card. But if you were in need of some kind of photo ID, I'm sure the consulate has options for getting passports or like consular cards. You would want to prove that you entered before June 15th of 2007. A lot of times people use their vaccination records to prove this. You could also use school records, medical records if you had any kind of procedures or appointments or anything during that time. You would also want to show proof of the education requirement. Usually it's as simple as just copying your GED or your diploma, but if you are currently enrolled in some kind of program, you would want to provide some kind of enrollment form and then proof of your continued attendance. I have had people submit proof that they're enrolled in an online course for a GED, but because it's not, maybe they don't have regular classes and they just have to get certain milestones, the immigration will request evidence, proof that they're kind of attending the milestones or, you know, complying with the program itself. So just keep that in mind. Proof of your presence on June 15th. This is actually in 2012. This is actually one of the harder things for people to prove. June 15th, June is after school gets out, and so it's some people just don't have a lot of evidence of summertime. But try to find something. It could be school records, it could be bank credit card statements. If you know, credit card statements are great because a lot of times it will show where the transaction took place. Pay stubs if you were working at the time, medical records, maybe you had procedures, social media posts with location stamps. This is, you know, that's a little bit more of a creative option, but it is something. Letters from family members and friends who knew what you were doing on that day. You can get a little bit creative. You don't have to get exactly June 15th. It could be, you know, June 10th. But if you can't get exactly on the day, you want to see if you can find evidence from just before and just after. So, okay, on June 10th, my sister's birthday was June 10th. We had a party. My mom can write a letter about me going to that party. Here's a photo from the party. I was clearly there. And then look, on June 18th, I had a doctor's appointment to get my vaccination. So it would have been hard for me to be absent from the United States on June 15th if I was clearly here on the 10th and on the 18th. So you can kind of get as close to that 15th as you can. Proof of continuous presence. This is where the bulk of your evidence is going to be. You're going to want to show, if possible, some kind of document or piece of paper with your name and date every 3 months of every year starting in June of 2007. If you can go before that, maybe you entered in 2005 and you have school records starting in 2005, include it. It doesn't hurt, and it just further substantiates that you entered before the June 15, 2007 date. This could be school transcripts, pay stubs, medical records, kids. If you had kids around that time, you could include their birth certificates to show that you gave birth in the United States. Taxes aren't great in the sense that, you know, I can travel outside the country and still file taxes inside the United States. So, but I do like to include them if you did pay taxes that year, because it also demonstrates that you're kind of a good, you know, law-abiding citizen, which always helps. But social media posts, also letters, you know, you can get creative. If your family is willing to write letters, that you didn't go on kind of international travel trips during the summers, if you don't, you know, all of that stuff helps. You may need to get a little bit creative if there are kind of large chunks of time that you don't have something showing you are in the United States. If you're really worried about this, I would definitely recommend meeting with an attorney to determine if you've kind of met that burden with the evidence that you've compiled. Proof of good moral character. This is not a requirement, but we always, if you have the evidence and you want to include it, just to show that you are a good person, that you contribute to society in positive ways by paying taxes. Maybe you have a license to, you know, for a business, or maybe you are licensed as a, you know, esthetician or a nail technician, or, you know, something like that, that shows that you are employable and that you know, kind of give back by either starting a business or just being certified in something. I think it's great. Definitely include it. If you've never been arrested and you have no criminal record, I also like to include the BCI. It's the Utah BCI that just shows that you don't have a criminal record. Obviously, if you do have one, even if it's minimal, your BCI will not show up blank. So you might not want to include it if you have things on it. but just an option. Things to just kind of have ready when you're about to fill out the forms. This is just some things are kind of hard to compile. Like if you are applying for DACA for the first time, you have to list all the places you've lived since you entered the United States. So for some people, I mean, that goes back to the 90s, or, you know, I had one client that had been here since 1991, just a few months after she was born. So she really needed to work with her family and her parents to figure out all the places she lived. So you want to make a list of all of the places you've lived and the approximate dates you lived at each place. List of all your employment, just in case, for the last 5 years. List of all your entries into the United States, where you crossed, and how you crossed. So if you don't remember or you don't know, this might just be something like, I think I entered when I was 6, and it would have been about 2006 or whatever, you know, however you want to do it. But if you have more than one entry, you're going to want to make sure you have the list of where and how, so that you can include that. List of all the times you were arrested, charged, or convicted of anything that's more significant than a minor traffic violation. If your traffic violation includes alcohol or drugs, then that also should be included. You're going to want to know the reasons for your arrest, the dates, the locations, and the ultimate outcomes. Did you go to court and pay fines? Were you sentenced to 10 days in jail? Did you do probation? You want to make sure that you know the kind of entirety of that process. You are going to need certified court records for each incident, and I do include kind of a picture of what a certified court record would look like, or what you would want to get certified if you have that. So we'll go through that. If you have, if you ask yourself, okay, I've been arrested, I've been cited, I've been charged and convicted, what do I do? So this question is the trickiest part, I think, of the kind of preparation process. So the standard to qualify is you must not have been convicted of a felony or a significant misdemeanor or 3 or more other misdemeanors, and you do not otherwise pose a threat to the national security or public safety of the United States. So you might notice that that is a little bit wishy-washy. There's a lot of room there for immigration to decide on their own on a case-by-case basis whether someone applies, but I can give you kind of framework so that you can determine, whether you need to meet with an attorney or whether you kind of feel safe applying. So a felony is generally a crime where the potential sentence is 1 year or more in jail or prison. A misdemeanor is a crime that has a sentence for an indeterminate time, but not to exceed 1 year. And actually in Utah, it's 364 days or fewer. A significant misdemeanor is not a real thing in the criminal law or even under immigration law. It was actually invented for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I don't know if it was invented, but it was kind of put forth during this process. And so we're kind of piecing together what it means. USCIS has put out guidelines so that you can kind of determine whether your misdemeanors might qualify. So I've made a link there. It's a case-by-case determination. If your crime involves any of these things, you can pretty much assume it will be considered a significant misdemeanor, and you should meet with an attorney to determine whether you should go ahead and apply or not. It's domestic violence, sexual abuse or exploitation, unlawful possession of a firearm, burglary, drug distribution or trafficking, or driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol. The most common is going to be DUIs, DWIs. If you have one of those, we just say you do not qualify, you should not apply. So the other qualification is if you have 3 or more just regular misdemeanors. So you can have up to 2 non-significant misdemeanors and still qualify. These sometimes look like, minor in possession or minor in consumption, tickets, like things like that are ultimately misdemeanors but are non-significant. If you have 3 or more of these, but they all come from one incident. So let's say you got picked up for graffiti and you got charged with 2 counts of 2 misdemeanors from that one kind of graffiti incident, tagging incident. USCIS might determine, since those came out of the same incident, that it's just actually 1 misdemeanor instead of 2. So I would still meet with an attorney if you're kind of unsure, or you want to just double check whether your misdemeanors disqualify you, just to be safe. So that's kind of the end of kind of the general qualifications and rundown. I did it on purpose kind of quickly because I know a lot of you are here because you already know, but if anyone has questions, we can kind of pause there.
Muchas gracias, Kendall. Me parece que ahorita no tenemos preguntas, pero creo que en un rato más que tengamos las sesiones privadas, yo creo que ahí van a salir. Sobre todo esto que nos dices es muy, muy importante, ¿no? Lo de un serious misdemeanor, ¿no? Como dices en el tema penal, en el tema criminal, pues no significa nada, ¿no? Es un tema específicamente para migración. Entonces, hay que tomarlo en cuenta, ¿no? Porque a lo mejor justamente eso, alguien no sabe, tiene un misdemeanor, pero pues como a lo mejor un abogado penal te puede decir, no, pues es misdemeanor o felony, no hay un serio misdemeanor, ¿no? Pero para migración sí importa, y por eso la importancia de esto. Entonces, pues creo que está bien, vamos a continuar.
Okay. So starting with the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals application, it is a 7-page form, and I'm just going to walk through every page and talk about the things that you should be filling in. Obviously, some cases might have, and I'll kind of note where your situation might change what you put there, but most of it should be pretty straightforward with the information I give. So this first part 1, is just to determine whether this is an initial request or a renewal request. If you have had DACA before and it expired in the last year or is still current when you're submitting it, it is a renewal request, in which case you would put the date that it expires in that box under number 2. If your DACA has been expired for more than 1 year, or you've never had DACA before, you should check initial request. And this is a little bit confusing. If you had DACA before and it's been expired for more than 1 year, you would check initial request, and then you could still put the date that it expired in that little box, just so that it's kind of a flag to immigration that this is not your actual first application, it's just that it's been more than a year since it expired. You would write, and 3A through C, that's where you put your full legal name. This can get a little bit tricky for people maybe who have been married and changed their names. For most people, your legal name is what appears on your birth certificate or your passport. In Utah, your name, you can automatically change your name with marriage. And in the state of Utah, you would simply just start using a new name. And your marriage license is kind of your name change document. However, if that's the case, that's okay to put your married name, but you would want to also include your marriage license, which I didn't list in the list of evidence, but you would also include your marriage license to show why your name, your legal name, doesn't necessarily match your birth certificate or passport. So that's just kind of something that's a little bit more nuanced, but you should not put just whatever name you want to be called, that it needs to be a legal name. Your mailing address is where you want your form sent. It does not need to be where you live. And if you have had trouble with your mail, if your mailbox is unsecured, maybe you don't have a key lock, or there are lots of people who have access, I definitely recommend finding either a family member or maybe getting a P.O. box and designating that as your mailing address. Your work permit will come to this address, and you want to make sure that that is as secure a location as possible. So you would put your mailing address. It's okay for it to be your physical address as well, but just so that you know you do have the freedom to have that as a separate address. So this number 5 is where you would put whether you are now or have ever been in removal proceedings, or if you've ever had a removal order issued against you. So this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated. Removal, again, is just a fancy word for deportation. And if you are now in removal, it means that you have an ongoing court case before an immigration judge. Usually it means you still have, maybe you still have upcoming hearings, or maybe you're done with the immigration judge, but your case is now pending on an appeal. That means that you have an ongoing immigration case, and you should check yes. If you have, let's say in the past you were in removal, but you were ordered removed but never left, you should still check yes, because it says there, do you have a removal order? So you would check yes. And then down at 5A through G is where you're going to explain kind of how you checked, why you checked yes. 5A is when your case is active. You have ongoing court hearings before immigration judge, or your case is currently up on appeal to the higher court. You would just check that, and then at 5F you would put the date of your most recent action. So that could be maybe the date of your last hearing. It could be the date you filed your appeal. Whatever was more recent. If it's 5B, that means that you have an open case, but you're not attending hearings because it's administratively closed. Before Trump, cases were being administratively closed often. If the person had no criminal record and was otherwise kind of a law-abiding citizen, filed taxes and taking care of kids, things like that, then Department of Homeland Security was administratively closing cases. So that just meant that it was basically on pause. They weren't going to proceed to try to remove you. You would check that, and then in 5F, you would put the actual date that your case was administratively closed. If your case was terminated, so termination has a special definition within the immigration court. That means that the Department of Homeland Security has actually decided not to try to deport you at all. They've actually withdrawn their charges against you, and your case is officially kind of done. That is super rare. It did happen, I think, more under, maybe in the early 2000s, pre-Obama, pre-2001 terrorist attacks, but it does not happen often. If you think your case was terminated, that's great. I would include proof of the termination. So whatever order you have from that immigration judge showing termination. If you've been ordered removed, you would just check that subject to a final order. You still qualify for DACA. They just need to know that you are in the system. And you would, in 5F, you would put, in 5F, you would put the date you were terminated if you're checking 5C. If you're checking 5D, it would be the date that your order became final, either after your appeal, or even if you didn't appeal, the day that your judge signed the final order. I've never checked 5E because there really aren't any other options before the immigration judges, but if you think 5E applies to you, definitely you could touch base with us in the breakout sessions or meet with an attorney to just talk through that. Locations of proceedings are wherever you attended your hearings, or wherever the judge was that issued your final order. So we're going to move on to page 2. So this is page 2 on the left side. It's your alien registration number is a number that is issued to all the foreign nationals in the immigration system. This is kind of like a social, except it's just for foreign nationals. So it's, if you have applied for something, I guess it's not for all foreign nationals. People with visas don't necessarily get them. It's more for people who are undocumented or who have become undocumented and are in the system or have applied for benefits through the immigration system. They would have an A number. It's an 8 or 9 digit number. And if your number is 8 digits because it's very old, you would just put a 0 at the front and fill it in there. If you have a social security number, you could put it there. Do not put ITINs in the social security space, number space, and don't put fake numbers. If you have been working on a fake number, or someone kind of got you a number so that you could, seek employment or enroll in college, that's okay. But you should not put it there. It's only for valid social security numbers. your date of birth, gender. So, this comes up. My stance, I'm not sure if everyone feels this, all the attorneys feel this way, but that is your, whatever gender you identify with. If it doesn't match the sex on your birth certificate, then that's okay. You would just maybe include a short, brief statement about why. I haven't had an issue with that yet, with checking a gender that doesn't match with the sex on your birth certificate. 10 is just where you were born, the city and country, and then where you currently reside. This should be in the United States. You can put just USA, and then country of nationality is just wherever you have a passport, wherever you're considered a citizen. Marital status, pretty self-explanatory. Here for 14A through C is where you're going to list other names used. This includes other versions of your own name. I realize that some people use 2 last names, and so sometimes in the system here in the US, your second last name gets cut, or even they use your second last name because it's kind of the last one in your name. And so you want to make sure that you include variations of your own name that might show up in the evidence that you're submitting, because it's important for immigration to understand, like, this is still you. It's just that the way our system is set up sometimes doesn't allow for you to have 2 last names. So if the names you've used don't fit in just that one space, you can use page 7, kind of an overflow, which we'll talk about at the end, but it has space for you to include other names if there are some. So this is the other half, the kind of the right side of page 2. This really is just what you identify as. I like for it to match if you have a Utah driver's license or a privilege card. It is nice for it to match for the things that can't change, like your height. But I've never had it be an issue. So really just, fill it out to the best of your ability and however you identify. The continuous presence since June 15th of 2007 is a component. So that you have to check yes, that's a qualification of the form. However, there are some kind of caveats. If you were in the United States before that date and before you were 16 and then left after you were 16, left and then entered after you were 16, that doesn't necessarily disqualify you. There's some, paragraphs there to kind of flag some issues. I would definitely recommend talking with an attorney if you think you might still qualify, even though you entered, your second entry maybe was after you were 16, or so I know it's a little bit confusing, but you would want to check yes to that and be able to show records from before June 15th of 2007. So page 3 is where you're going to list all of your addresses and all of the times you've entered and left the United States. So for initial requests, if this is the first time you've applied, or if this is your first time after your DACA has been expired for more than 1 year, you do have to list all of your addresses since you entered. And this is where kind of some research intensity, like some research may need to happen. So if you entered in, 2002, you're going to need to go all the way back to then. This form, as you can see, has a place for month, date, year as when you started living somewhere and leaving. It's okay if you don't know the exact date. I would even just print it and then fill in by hand if it's just, I think it was around June of 2009 until around November of 2003. You can estimate in that way. You don't have to commit to exact days if you're unsure of the exact dates. If you have more than 4 addresses since you entered, you're going to want to do you're going to want to include the rest of the addresses in the addendum on page 7, and we'll talk about that at the end. But just because you have more than 4 does not mean that you get to stop. You actually have to continue and list since you entered, even if there are more than 4. For your departure dates, so it says there, you know, if for initial requests, you list all the absences since the June 15th, 2007. And for renewals, again, you just list since, well, I don't think I mentioned that for your addresses as well. If this is a renewal application, you actually only need to list your addresses since your last application. So if you know, have had DACA for 2 years and you're renewing, you just have to list in the last 2 years where you've lived. And the same goes for your departures. If you have left, it's an initial disclosure, or if it's a renewal, you just list since you last renewed. And then if it's an initial, you need to list all of your departures and entries since June 15th of 2007. If you have departures since June 15th of 2007, I recommend meeting with an attorney to talk about the specifics of those departures. If you were gone, you know, short times, I would say less than 3 months, they don't break your continuous presence. However, if you were gone, or you may have been gone more than 3 months, then that can actually disrupt the continuous presence requirement and can actually disqualify you. So just keep that in mind as you're filling things out and collecting your work, your data, because that can really, it can affect whether you qualify. It's important, as just a side note, it is important for you to assume that immigration knows when you entered or when you came and went. Sometimes people want to say, well, I wasn't picked up, I wasn't caught at the border, and so how are they going to know? Like if I just put that I never left, but I actually did. It's my policy, kind of my recommendation to everyone, that you should assume immigration knows. Because if you lie on this form and they find out you lied, you know, that's fraud, and that's a whole new problem that you have to deal with. And it could result in you being put in removal proceedings, and it could change your entire life. So the kind of rule of thumb is to just assume that immigration knows. And if there's any record that you were in Mexico, or that you left, maybe you went to Canada for the weekend and you know they didn't stamp anything and they just waved you through, but maybe, you know, maybe there's a picture of you on someone's social media that shows you in Canada, and suddenly immigration knows about it. So just assume that they're going to know, and so do your best to fill it out the best that you can and to tell the truth, just to avoid issues with fraud or, you know, removal proceedings later. So question 8, have you left the United States without advance parole since August 15th of 2012? So when the deferred action for childhood arrivals became a thing, they also allowed people to request permission to leave and come back based on having DACA status. So that permission, that advance permission to leave and come back, is called advance parole. Everyone who has DACA and has left and come back should have requested advanced parole that allowed them to leave and be let back in lawfully. So what they're specifically asking for is, have you left without advanced parole? And again, assume that if you left without advanced parole and re-entered, that they know about it. Even if you don't think there's any evidence, you should assume that they know. So you would fill that out. It's 8, and then so that's just question 8, and then questions A and then 10. Well, questions A are just for your most recently issued passport if you have one, and then question 10 is about a border crossing card number. Not many people have these anymore, but if you do have one, you can include it. And then part 3, question 1 is for first-time applicants only, and also for those who had DACA before, but their DACA has been expired for more than a year. You do have to respond as though you're in a new filing. So you would fill out the information about whether you entered before you were 16, the approximate date that you entered, the approximate place that you entered. A lot of people say, well, I don't remember. I was a kid, you know, I was 4. I was told to just be asleep in the back seat. I don't remember where I was. You can put unknown if you don't know. If people have told you where you entered, you can put what people have told you. I tend to say, like, it's kind of my default is that if you don't know and you sincerely can't confirm what people have told you, then it's okay to put that you're not sure. or to put unknown. So moving on to page 4. Again, this is an extension of, only for new applicants. So immigration status on June 15th of 2012. So that was when it was signed, when it became a thing. You do need to have no lawful status on that day. So if you entered with a visa, but it had expired, that's great. If you entered, maybe you were paroled in and you were given 6 months and that expired and you stayed, that should be no lawful status. If you have to say F1 or student or things like that, then you do not qualify to apply for DACA. And you can meet with an attorney to kind of confirm that, the details of that. Question 5 is, so an I-94 is an arrival departure record. Back in the day, I'm not sure when they started doing them online, but back in the day, they were an actual kind of small white card that they issued you at borders or at customs. And it gave you a number, kind of an entry record number with your name, and then the amount of time you were allowed to stay. If you have that and you have the number, great. If you entered more recently, they're all online. I've included the link there, and you could just put in your information and it'll get you that record. And if you have the I-94, then it says there, the date that you were supposed to depart. And so you would want to include that. The education, 6, 7, and 8. This is specifically about, so it's asking for the type of compliance. So how do you comply with the education requirement? Did you get your diploma or your GED? Are you currently enrolled in a program? So you would want to put that. You would put the name of the institution that either issued you the GED or the diploma or the place where you're attending school, and either the date that you completed it or the date that you're anticipating completing it. One thing that came up recently that it hadn't occurred to me, someone had put that they were currently in school, but it was the University of Utah, and they were anticipating finishing in 3 years. That's not what they're talking about. They're actually talking about how do you comply with the requirement that you either had a diploma, that you got a diploma, a GED, or that you're currently in the process of getting one of those 2 things. They're not asking you, what's your education situation right now? So that person, we erased that and we just put high school diploma on this date. And then the military service, pretty self-explanatory. You would fill in whatever information you have about that. The part 4 is where things can get a little bit tricky for people because it starts asking you about your criminal history. Have you ever been arrested? So questions 1 and 2 are specifically asking about arrests, charges, or convictions. And they require that if you check yes, you have to include court disposition documents, which is basically a summary of when you were arrested or when the incident happened and kind of the steps that took place in the criminal proceedings and then the outcome. Whether you were, sentenced to pay fines, take classes, have probation, all of that should be included in the document that you get. And this is actually a docket for a speeding ticket I got. Again, don't include speeding tickets, but I wanted to make sure that you guys kind of understood what a court disposition was. So this is the summary document. This is what it looks like. You would actually go to the specific court that kind of worked, that handled your violation or your crime, your charges. In this incident, it was the Salt Lake City Justice Court. So that's where I would go and I would say, I need a certified copy of my court disposition. And that court, and the court will actually give you this exact document with a stamp that says certified copy, and then the clerk signs it. And so that's the document that you want to try to get. If it was something that happened a very long time ago and you can't get copies, or maybe you expunged your record without realizing that you would need it later, I would recommend meeting with a lawyer to kind of talk about, you may need to get records unsealed. You might need to just talk through your specific situation. So well, let's go back to, so page 4, after you've answered, those first 2 questions about criminal history, and you understand that you do need to provide additional evidence if you answer yes to those things, you would go through those questions and just answer them. What they're trying to get to is, are you a threat to the public safety and national security? So, when the question is asking, have you participated in terrorist organizations or activities? Are you the member of a gang? Have you ever engaged in any of these things like torture, genocide, killing someone, injuring someone? If you answer yes to any of those questions, you should, truthfully, obviously, then you should meet with an attorney to make sure, or to determine whether you should proceed with applying for DACA. These can have pretty severe consequences. If you are put in the system and you've admitted to gang activity, then there might be pretty severe long-term consequences to that. So just touch base with an attorney before you submit if you end up needing to answer yes to any of those questions. Again, assume that immigration knows or will find out when they do a background check on you or when they kind of look into you. So we don't always know what's out there on the internet. So just assume that they either already know or that they could find out if you have participated in any of those things. Again, this is the court disposition, where to go to get it. So page 5 is kind of the end of the form. You would just check there if you can read and understand English, or if you needed the help of an interpreter. There is no language requirement for DACA, and so there's no kind of negative consequence to you if you needed help filling out this form based on just the language. Your interpreter would need to fill out his or her information so that they can be a little bit on the hook for any potential wrong answers. You can kind of say, well, that might have been the interpretation or whatever. So you would fill in your telephone number and just your contact information, and then and sign on question 2A and date 2B. Your interpreter fills in part 6 if you used one. Page 6 is, well, the continuation of the interpreter. They would write in there, that first box is for the language that they used in interpreting for you. That's where they would sign and date. And then the prepare is if someone helped you fill out the form, and it was a significant help, like this person maybe actually physically filled it out for you and just asked you the questions. This does not need to be an attorney or accredited rep. I always recommend that if you didn't fill it out, then the person who did should sign. It puts them on the hook for the answers, and it protects you a little bit if some of the answers are not, are just end up not being true. I would definitely recommend filling it out by yourself, making sure that the information is correct. Don't submit it with the help of someone else and just say, well, if things are wrong, like it's that person's fault. You are still responsible for the information. And by signing, you are saying that you've reviewed it and that you know it's true. And then the prepare would sign, at 7A and date if possible. Page 7 is just the overflow page. That's where you would put maybe additional names, additional addresses. It's where you would put in any just information that didn't fit in the space provided. So that's the DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals application specifically. We're going to move on to the work permit application, and I see that I have about 12 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through all of it. So the employment the employment application a lot of the information is going to be similar, and it should match your DACA application. The information that is the same should be the same. So your legal name. So the first part 1, is asking what type of applicant you are. If this is the first work permit that you're requesting through DACA, then it should be marked as an initial permission to accept. If this is, a replacement one, then obviously you would pick that. If this is a renewal based on, because you've already had employment authorization under DACA, you can click renewed, a renewal. The reason I'm pausing is because I realized that for people who had DACA before, but their DACA was expired for more than a year, their DACA application is submitted like it's an initial request. The thing that I'm suddenly not certain about is whether you also need to put that this is an initial permission to accept employment. My gut is yes, that you need to still check that it's an initial one, because you're filling it out as though it's a new application. But I can double check with that about that and get the information to the consulate to provide to anyone who might be concerned about that or might fit that setup there. You would include in part 2 your full name. Again, this should be your legal name. If you're going to use a married name, that's okay. Just make sure that you have your birth certificate or passport that show your birth name with a marriage license that would or a court order showing how you changed your name. Otherwise, it should just be the name that appears on all your official documents. This application is a little bit different because it provides you actual space, more space to provide your names. Be sure to include any variations of your own name that could appear on evidence. Same exact kind of idea as your DACA application. So this is a lot. There's a lot of busy information. I realized afterward that it was a lot of words. I should have split it up a little bit, but we'll just walk through it the same. Mailing address is the same idea. It should match the DACA application mailing address. If you do not have a secure mailing box or a way to make sure that your work permit will be safe, you should pick a PO box or someone else's address that you trust to have all your mail go to, but it should match your application for DACA. There on question 6, it says, is your current mailing address the same as your physical address? Just you check yes or no. If it is, then you can leave 7A through D blank. I actually like to write it in anyway, so even though it's a little bit redundant, I say yes, and then I write my physical address in. I mean, not me, but I write for my clients, I would still write it in. That's not necessary. Like I said, it's redundant, but you can do that. If you have an A number, you can put that there. If you have an online account number for USCIS, this is specifically, so this is question 9. If you've created an account with USCIS so that you're getting updates through their system, then you would want to put it there so they link this application to that account. A gender, again, is my interpretation is you should put the gender that you identify with. Your marital status there for question 11. Question 12, have you previously filed an I-765? So if you had a work permit based on, let's say you applied for asylum and that's still pending and you've gotten work permits through your asylum application, you can check yes to that because you've filed work permits before. So that question isn't asking if you've applied for work permits under DACA before. It's just asking, have you ever filed this form before? So you're going to check yes if you have. And if this is your first time getting work permit or work authorization, you're going to check no. Question 13A is, has the Social Security Administration ever officially issued you a Social Security card? So this is specifically to you. Have you ever been issued a Social Security card? And if yes, you're going to fill in your number. Again, this has to be valid numbers only, so no invented numbers, no ITINs, just only numbers. Some people were issued Social Security numbers in the 90s or 80s, 90s. They were just kind of given numbers. You can use that. You should use that. You should only use the numbers that have been given to you over the years or ever. That number remains the same. Question 14, do you want the Social Security, basically the Social Security Administration to issue you a card? So this question people are kind of like, well, I already have a card and a number. Do I need a new one? No. If you've applied for DACA in the past and you have a number and card, you do not need a new card just because you're renewing your employment authorization. But let's say you don't know where your card is, it's been lost for a while, but you know your number and you'd like a new card, then you would check yes. Or if you have a card through your asylum process and now you're getting one through DACA, you don't need a new card just because this is a different type of a different type of case. And then if you wanted a new card, then you have to consent to the disclosure. Immigration asks for your permission to send information to the Social Security Administration, and you would fill in your parents' information just as authorization. 18A and B are where you list your countries that you have citizenship in. If you have more than citizenship in more than 2 countries, you would put it in the overflow on page 7. If you only have citizenship in one place, then you would just put none or NA in the second one. So page 3, place of birth, birth date are there, so that's pretty self-explanatory. The I-94 record, arrival, departure record is what we talked about before. If you have one in the I-821D form, then you need to put that same one, or it should all match here. Definitely note that what they're asking for, even though it says information about your last arrival, but then question 21B says passport number of your most recently issued passport. So it could be that you entered in 2005 and you had a passport number, you had a passport then, but now you have a new one. Put your most recently issued passport, like answer the specific question. These ones are pretty much, date that you entered. You can estimate, again, all this information should match your doc application. Most people don't have N numbers. That's for student exchange visitors. When this question 27 asks for your eligibility category, the work authorization instructions, the 765 instructions explain how to know what your code is. Deferred action for childhood arrivals, your code is C33. So that should be the number you put in. So the rest of, this is it. The rest of that side on the right of this form is specifically for people who are applying for work authorization under different categories. So you can just skip over the rest of page 3. And actually the top part of page, the whole left side of page 4, you can also skip because it is for people applying under other categories. And then this right side is where you fill in, can you read and speak English? If not, did you use an interpreter? What's the interpreter's name? And if you use someone to help you fill out the form, that prepared the form for you, you fill it in the exact way you would the deferred action for childhood arrivals application. So this is where you sign. The interpreter's information goes in part 4, and then your preparer's information goes in part 5. And then here in part 6 is page 7, and that's where all your overflow information will go if you have any. If you don't have any, you can leave this blank, or you can actually write in NA because it's not applicable. And then we'll just quickly go into the 765 worksheet. This is a place for you to give information about why you want employment authorization. Again, you would put your full legal name. Your name should be the same as the other 2 forms. Part 2, question 1, asks for your annual income. So this, sometimes people get a little bit confused about this. I just say, how much do you currently make in 1 week? And then I have that person multiply it by 52, because there are 52 weeks, and we put it there. That doesn't mean that you are 100% going to make that much. It doesn't mean that you are, not going to change employment or anything like that. They're just asking you for an idea of how much you're going to make. Part 2, question 2, asks for your annual expenses. This is where people get a little bit like, ooh, what do I include? Try to come up with everything that you spend money on in 1 month, and then multiply that by 12. If you do expenses by weekly, you can do it that way. Don't exaggerate, but count everything. Account for, okay, I spend an average of $50 a week on gas. I spend an average of $100 a week in food, or, so don't exaggerate, but try to include everything you can. They don't ask for proof, so just get as close to your estimate as you can. Part 2, question 3 is, I like to say, if you were to sell everything you owned, how much money would you get? So if you have a car that's maybe worth $10,000, but you have a loan for $6,000, you would probably get $4,000 from that car, and so you would count it that way. All your computers, your furniture, your TVs, boats, anything that you have that is worth money, you should include. And then part 3 is to write an explanation for why you want work authorization. Be honest, but be thorough, and it's okay to add kind of details. I've given you some examples on this next slide, which maybe the consulate can send out or post somewhere, just as an example of situations. I live with my parents. I want to work so I can be self-sufficient. I want to go to college someday. I want to be, a nurse or a doctor someday, or I, I want to help my parents because they are getting older, or I want to support my kids and my family. And so just be as honest, and you can put as much as you want in there. Don't write something like, I don't need it, but I kind of want it, because even if you don't necessarily need an income, it would be nice to be able to save up or to help your family, and just include all of that information. So, all right, so I've made it to the end, and it was exactly an hour. I'm happy to take questions, or if we want to do breakout, that's good too.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is really, really amazing, really complete presentation. Really helpful for all of those who have their forms out and they are filling it out. And yeah, there's so much that I personally didn't know what you have to put and why you have to put it there. And I think it's really amazing the way that you explain it. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Hopefully all our friends are filling out their information. And then we're going to go to the breakout rooms to have questions from different attorneys. And well, we're going to have also this recorded, because in the future maybe we can stream it again. If people have doubts, go back to the Facebook page. If you have a doubt specifically in one part of the application, just go to that minute. You can see the exact explanation of that exact point that you have to fill out. So thank you so much, Kendall. I don't think we have questions. I think they are saving those for the breakout sessions. So I think we're gonna go to that part. We're gonna stop streaming, friends. So everyone that subscribe, go to the Zoom link that is already in your email, and well, let's have a 10-minute break, right? Let's go to the restroom, grab something to eat or something, and then we'll see you in about 10 minutes in the Zoom rooms to have their questions answered. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're gonna interview people for financial support, also to fill out to submit your applications. So thank you so much, everyone. Keep watching, keep in tune, and see you in the next occasion. Thank you so much.